Okay, so at the end of the last video, we said we were going to add collision detection. So a couple videos ago, I went ahead and added the collider circles, or collider spheres rather, and I really should have waited on that until this video because they weren't utilized then. So both the bullet and the enemy have sphere colliders. So it's a collision in a spherical area. They're both set to triggers, so they won't bounce off each other. We're not talking like someone kicking a football. They're going to be triggers. So what we're going to do is since colliders have been added, all we have to do now is add a script, or if there's already a script attached to the bullet and to the enemy, to detect if a collision with the opposite has occurred. If so, then they're just both mutually going to be destroyed. And here's how we do that. First, we have to clean something else up. The z-axis we are ignoring, okay, because the z is moving towards and away from the camera. But since we're in the 3D environment, it is still there, and you still have to be mindful of it. The player is at negative 1.06 on the z-axis, okay? The bullet gets instantiated also at 1.06. So if you go to the hero control, you'll see instantiate. So it's getting instantiated at the hero's position, which is at least on the z-axis, negative 1.06. I was a little bit careless. When in the GM script, when the mobs are instantiated, I had this at negative 3. The problem is negative 3 is out here. Negative 1 is over here. So what happens is, even though it looked like collisions would be occurring, they wouldn't. So you need to have them on the same, they need to be as close as possible on the z-axis so collisions actually occur. So you just want these to be changed to negative 106. That way the enemy and the bullets are on the similar depth on the z-axis. So they're not like passing over each other. You want them to actually collide. Okay, so having fixed that, the actual collision detection is easy. So with the shot control, you just have to add a new section. So void on trigger enter collider other. This is a predefined routine, so it's case sensitive. So capital O, capital T, capital E. It occurs when a collision with a trigger occurs, as the name would suggest. Other is the name that's going to be assigned to what is being collided with. So if other.name equals, now this is the shot, so we're looking for a collision with the enemy. The prefab is called slime, but when it gets instantiated, it appends the word clone in parentheses. So if the bullet collides with an object called slime, parenthesis clone, we want something to happen. Well, we want to destroy the game object that this script is attached to. This is attached to the bullet. Now we just have to reciprocate. We have to put a similar command for the enemy. So there's already an enemy AI script. So similarly, outside of start, outside of update, you will also add on trigger enter collider. But here you're looking for bullet. So they should both detect collisions and they should both get destroyed. And that should do it. Just like that. So now you've added collisions. Now, as you can see, there's game balance issues. Like, for instance, does the bullet travel too slowly? Things like that. And we still have that glitch where the bullet isn't aligned quite correctly, but that's okay. Now, so we've destroyed the enemy. Now let's have a little visual for when the enemy gets destroyed. So we're going to go to Game Object, Particle System, and we'll just call this boom. We want it to be a shape circle. We need to rotate it so it faces the camera. So it looks like that would be 0, negative 180, negative 180. We're going to shut the looping off before we finish, but while we're building it, we need it to loop. So we want the lifespan to be really short, like 0.7. Speed should be slower. Particle size way too big. Emission needs to be increased substantially. Let's try 700, which means you usually have to increase the max particle to make sure it doesn't get exceeded. Oops. That is at, need to be closer to the camera to see it. It's kind of big and really not kind of dense enough. So let's shrink. There's little dots that you can click on to change the size, the circumference. It's better. Still lasting too long. So let's make this 0.4 much smaller. And let's have it change over time. So color over time, we'll have it start off as like, so if you click there and then there, you're selecting the color for that position. There we go. And then over here, you click there, and then again click on the color selector. We'll make it red. And we will also, even though the particles are relatively small, we can have size of a lifetime change. So you click here, it opens up the graph, right click, choose add key, because you don't want the change to happen the whole time. And let's actually increase that rate. Let's go up to 900. And again, we'll increase the max particles so it doesn't get exceeded. Maybe we can increase the particle size just a little bit. As you can see, this is kind of like sculpting. You're going to make a lot of little tweaks to make it look just right. Okay. So, one last increase to rate. One last increase to size. And we don't want it to loop, and we want the duration to be very short too. It's probably a little bit too short. Let's try 0.5. So keep in mind, duration is how long particles are being generated, but after the last particle is being generated, it still has that much lifetime. So every particle has that much lifetime. So that means this is going to run for a half a second, but still run for another 0.4 of a second. So the entire cycle will run just under 1 second. All right, that's good enough. It's not meant to be a particle demonstration. It's just meant to build on this functionality. So now we delete that. So I dragged and dropped into asset area. I deleted it. And now what we're going to do is we want that to be instantiated. So you can either have the enemy be aware of it and instantiate it when it gets destroyed, or you can have the bullet be aware of the prefab and instantiate it 6 one way, 1.5 dozen the other. We'll keep the pyrotechnics together, so we'll have actually, no, I take that back. We really want, if you want the explosion to be centered on the enemy, then you're really going to have the enemy instantiate it. If you want the explosion to be centered on the bullet, then you'd have the bullet instantiate it. So I think it actually looks slightly better to be attached to the enemy. So we go back to the enemy script. Public transform, capital T, and we'll call it boom obj, boom object. So we'll save it. So we already have the enemy highlighted. That new variable shows up here. Drag and drop it onto it. And now we just need it to be instantiated. So we already have the area for when the enemy gets struck and destroyed. So you just build on top of that. Instantiate the boom object where transform.position. What rotation? Use the boom object's own rotation. And just like that, you've built on what you've already done. So sometimes the hardest part is carving out the area that you want something to happen, and then it's just a matter of building on top of that. So unless I miss something, that should work. Yep, it's really kind of faint actually, and I'm not sure why. Is it looked... Probably because it's on the enemy's Z, so a lot of the particles are probably being lost behind the floor. It would be my guess. So, well, we'll leave it for now. You can break this down. This is actually, so you got three arguments. What is being instantiated, where it's being instantiated, and the rotation of the object being instantiated. This you can actually break down to three separate vectors. So you can do this as a new vector 3, extract x, y, and z. So you can leave it like this, or you can do new vector 3, and I'll leave this up to you if you want to do this. New vector 3, and again, we use that transform.position. We'll extract the x, comma, transform.position, extract the y, but now it's the z that we said we need to tweak. So transform.position.z, and we want to move it slightly towards the camera, so minus 0.3 f. Parenthesis. And that should move it ever so slightly towards the camera, because if you watch, so if you will click on the character, okay, if you watch up here, if you move towards the camera, it becomes more of a negative. So let's see how that looks. Yeah, see, now it looks good because the particles were getting lost behind the floor. So again, for functional purposes, we're not looking at the z-axis, but it is there and it is being utilized. So if we had done this in a 2D environment, the z-axis wouldn't have been so difficult to deal with. But in this case, like I said, we made the choice to go to a with a 3D environment for a variety of reasons. And but now it's almost there. You almost have a completely functioning game. Very limited functionality. You would need to have difficulty settings such as the rate of enemies increasing, scoring. Every time you destroy an enemy, you would keep track of the score, and things like that. So I might still do one more video. That looks at things like that, such as scorekeeping and difficulty setting. But for difficulty, you just go to the GM object. And right now, an enemy is being spawned every 3 seconds. I think I mentioned that this can be a variable. So after a certain amount of enemies get killed, you change this to 2.5 seconds, and then 2 seconds, and then 1 second. And then, enemies just get spawned faster and faster and faster. Also, what you can do is right now, enemies are being destroyed with a single collision. What you could do is rather than destroying the object, you would say have a separate variable that tracks hit points. So on trigger enter wouldn't destroy the enemy, it would simply subtract a certain amount of hit points, and then you'd have a separate routine that says, okay, if hit points are 0, then you destroy. So, like I said, maybe 1 or 2 more videos where we look at things like that, difficulty settings and such. Okay, so that should do it for this one.